When Liam's father passes away, he believes his inheritance will be split equally with his sister Rachel, just as their father had always promised. But when Rachel and her husband Ben forge a new will and claim everything, the house, the savings, the family legacy, Liam is left with nothing but rage. Determined to uncover the truth, Liam embarks on a relentless mission to expose their lies. What begins as a fight for justice soon spirals into a shocking revelation about greed, betrayal, and a deadly secret that changes everything. As Liam dismantles their lives piece by piece, he discovers that the cost of revenge may be far higher than he ever imagined. When my dad passed away, I thought the hardest part would be losing him. I was wrong. Grief, I could handle. It was the betrayal that broke me. But I didn't know that yet, not at the funeral, when I stood beside my sister Rachel and her husband, Ben, as we said our goodbyes. Rachel cried softly into a tissue, and Ben kept an arm around her shoulders, his expression somber. If you'd asked me then, I would have told you they were my rocks, my family, the only people I could count on. But looking back, the signs were already there. I just didn't see them. It started subtly, like a whisper you can't quite make out. Rachel and Ben began making decisions about Dad's house without asking me. At first, it was little things, Rachel suggesting we clear out the attic, Ben fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen. I figured they were just being proactive, trying to take some of the burden off my shoulders. But then Rachel announced that she and Ben were moving into the house, just to keep it in good shape until we figure out what to do with it. I remember sitting across from her in the living room, the air thick with the smell of old wood and dust. "Don't you think we should talk about this first?" I asked. Rachel waved me off, like I was being unreasonable. "What's there to talk about? It's not like you're going to move in. You've got your apartment downtown." She wasn't wrong, but it wasn't the point. "It's Dad's house," I said, my voice firm. "It belongs to both of us." "Of course," she said with a sugary smile. "And when we sell it, we'll split the money 50-50, just like Dad wanted. But for now, someone needs to take care of the place." Her logic sounded airtight, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Still, I didn't push. Rachel was my sister. I trusted her. That trust took its first hit a few weeks later. I'd stopped by the house to pick up some of my things, old photo albums, a box of Dad's books. When I got there, I found Ben in the driveway unloading furniture from a moving truck. He didn't even look up when I walked over. "What's going on?" I asked, gesturing to the truck. "Rachel wanted to redecorate," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Redecorate? The house wasn't even theirs. It was ours. And yet, as I stepped inside, it was clear they'd already started treating it like their own. The old floral couch Dad had loved was gone, replaced by a sleek leather sectional. The walls, once covered in family photos, were now bare, waiting for whatever generic art Rachel had picked out. I tried to keep my cool. "Don't you think we should have talked about this first?" Ben shrugged. Rachel thought it was best. You know how she is, always taking charge. That was one way to put it. Another way would be to call it what it was, overstepping. But I bit my tongue and left with my box of books, telling myself it wasn't worth a fight. It wasn't until Rachel casually mentioned over dinner a few nights later that Dad's savings were gone that I realized how wrong I'd been. "Gone?" I asked, setting down my fork. Rachel didn't even look up from her plate. "Yeah. There wasn't much there, anyway. Just enough to cover the funeral expenses." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "Dad was always saving. He was frugal." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Come on, Liam. You know he wasn't as responsible as he liked to pretend. Always spending on his hobbies, tools, gadgets, whatever caught his eye." That didn't sound like Dad at all. But Rachel said it so confidently, so casually, that for a moment I doubted myself. Maybe she was right. Maybe Dad had been spending more than I realized. Still, the pit in my stomach wouldn't go away. The doubts lingered, growing louder with each passing day. And then, a month later, I came back to the house and found all my childhood belongings dumped on the curb. I stood there, staring at the trash bags piled high with my old toys, school projects, and photo albums. Rachel was in the driveway, sipping wine and chatting with a neighbor. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, gesturing to the bags. Rachel turned to me with a bored expression. "We're decluttering. You should have picked this stuff up weeks ago." "Decluttering?" I snapped. "These are my things, Rachel. You had no right." "This isn't your house anymore, Liam," she cut me off, her voice dripping with condescension. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about? This is Dad's house. It belongs to both of us." Rachel smirked, swirling her wine in its glass. "Oh, didn't I tell you? Dad changed the will before he died. He left everything to me. Guess you're out of luck." I froze, her words echoing in my head. Changed the will? Dad would never do that. He'd been adamant about splitting everything equally between us. "I want to see the will," I said, my voice low and steady. Rachel's smirk widened. "Sorry, Liam. That's not how this works. The house is in my name now. And if you don't like it, well, too bad." She turned and walked inside, leaving me standing in the driveway, my fists clenched at my sides. For a moment, I felt helpless, like a child who'd been sent to bed without supper. But then, something inside me shifted. If Rachel and Ben wanted to steal what was rightfully mine, they'd have to pay the price. And I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to destroy them. I left Rachel's driveway that day with a storm brewing inside me. It wasn't just anger, it was something sharper, colder, a simmering determination. I'd spent my life playing by the rules, trusting people to do the right thing, especially family. But Rachel and Ben had crossed a line. They didn't just take what was mine, they laughed while doing it. And something about that smug smile, that look of triumph in Rachel's eyes, lit a fire I couldn't extinguish. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my cramped apartment, staring at the bare walls and thinking about Dad. He'd worked his entire life to build something for us, to give us a foundation. And now Rachel was throwing it all away for leather couches and overpriced wine. No. I wouldn't let her win. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Anita Patel, and while she didn't have a fancy office or a team of paralegals, she had a reputation for being relentless. I explained everything: Dad's original will, Rachel's sudden claim that it had been changed, and the way she and Ben were flaunting their newfound wealth. "You're sure there was an original will that split the inheritance?" Anita asked, her voice skeptical but not dismissive. "Yes," I said firmly. "Dad told me himself. And I'm positive he would never have left everything to Rachel." Anita leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her desk. "Do you have a copy of the original will?" That's when my stomach sank. "No," I admitted. "Rachel claims there's a new will, but she won't let me see it." She nodded slowly. "Without the original will or evidence of forgery, it's going to be hard to prove anything. The burden of proof is on you, and if the house is already in her name," she trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. I clenched my fists, my jaw tight. "There has to be something we can do." Anita studied me for a moment, her expression softening. "There might be. But it's going to take time, and a lot of digging. Are you prepared for that?" I nodded without hesitation. "I don't care how long it takes. I want justice." The first thing Anita did was file a formal request to see the new will. Rachel ignored it. Then Anita filed another, this time through the courts. That's when Rachel started getting nervous. She called me one evening, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Liam, why are you doing this? Dad wanted me to have the house. Can't you just accept that and move on?" "Dad wanted us to share everything," I shot back. "And if you're so confident that the will backs you up, why not show it to me?" Her tone shifted, becoming icy. "Fine. If you want to waste your time and money on lawyers, go ahead. But you're not going to find anything. The house is mine, Liam. You need to let it go." But I couldn't. And I wouldn't. I started digging into Dad's files. He wasn't exactly tech-savvy, but he'd kept most of his important documents on an old laptop. Rachel had taken it, of course, along with everything else of value. But what she didn't know was that Dad had backed up most of his files onto an external hard drive years ago, and I had it. For weeks, I combed through every folder, every document, every email. Most of it was mundane: tax returns, utility bills, receipts for tools he'd bought at the hardware store. But then, buried deep in a folder labeled Personal, I found it, a scanned copy of the original will. My heart raced as I opened the file. There it was, in black and white, Dad's signature, dated a year before his death, clearly stating that his assets were to be divided equally between me and Rachel. I stared at the screen, a mixture of relief and fury washing over me. I had proof. But I knew this wasn't over. Rachel and Ben had forged a new will, and if they were willing to go that far, they wouldn't back down without a fight. Armed with the original will, I went back to Anita. She was impressed, but cautious. "This is a big step," she said. "But it doesn't prove forgery. All it proves is that there was an earlier will. If Rachel has a newer one, the courts will assume it's valid unless we can prove otherwise." "How do we do that?" I asked. Anita leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "We need evidence. Emails, texts, anything that shows Rachel and Ben were planning this. Do you have access to any of their devices?" I shook my head. "No, but I can get into the house." Her eyebrows shot up. "Liam, I can't advise you to do anything illegal." "I'm not breaking in," I interrupted. "Rachel still thinks I'm backing down. She won't suspect anything if I stop by." Anita sighed, but she didn't argue. "Be careful," she said. Getting back into the house was easier than I expected. Rachel and Ben were hosting one of their pretentious dinner parties, so the place was full of people. I showed up with a bottle of wine, pretending to be the dutiful brother making amends. Rachel looked surprised to see me, but she quickly plastered on a smile. "Liam. I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Of course," I said, matching her tone. "I've been thinking, and you're right. We're family. We shouldn't let this get between us." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she didn't quite believe me, but she didn't question it. She handed me a glass of wine and went back to entertaining her guests. While everyone was distracted, I slipped upstairs. Rachel's office was locked, but Ben's wasn't. I rifled through his desk, careful not to disturb anything. And that's when I found it, a folder labeled Will. Inside were emails between Rachel and a lawyer I didn't recognize. They discussed everything: how to forge Dad's signature, how to make the new will look authentic, even how to transfer the house into Rachel's name without raising suspicion. My hands trembled as I took photos of every page with my phone. This was it. The smoking gun. I left the party soon after, Rachel barely noticing my departure. As I drove home, my heart pounded with a mixture of triumph and dread. I had what I needed to take Rachel and Ben down. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The evidence I had gathered was everything Anita and I needed to blow Rachel and Ben's scheme wide open. But as I sat in her office the next morning, reviewing the photos of their incriminating emails, something gnawed at the edge of my mind. "Liam," Anita said, glancing up from her laptop. "This is good. Really good. These emails prove they orchestrated the forgery, and the original will confirms they had no legal right to the inheritance. Once we present this to the court, the judge will have no choice but to reopen the case. I should have felt relieved, even vindicated. But instead, all I felt was a slow, simmering rage. This wasn't just about reclaiming my inheritance anymore. It was about making them pay. They hadn't just taken what was mine, they had lied, mocked me, and rubbed their victory in my face. And I wasn't going to let them walk away with just a slap on the wrist. "Anita," I said carefully, my voice low. "How much trouble could they get into for this?" She raised an eyebrow. "If the court rules in your favor, the house and the remaining assets would be transferred back to you. Rachel and Ben could also face criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and possibly perjury if they lied under oath. It's serious." I nodded, considering her words. But serious wasn't enough for me. Not yet. I started planning my next move. Rachel and Ben had spent the last year parading their ill-gotten wealth, flaunting their success to everyone who would listen. They'd built their entire social image on lies, and now I was going to dismantle it piece by piece. First, I leaked the emails. I created an anonymous email account and sent copies of the documents to Ben's employer, a high-end real estate firm known for its squeaky clean reputation. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. A week later, I got a call from a friend who worked in the industry. "Liam, you're not going to believe this," he said, barely able to contain his laughter. "Ben just got fired. Word is, someone exposed some shady business about forgery. His boss lost it." I hung up, a grim smile on my face. That was step one. Next, I turned my attention to Rachel. She was heavily involved in her church and community, always presenting herself as the perfect wife and devoted sister. So I sent the emails to the pastor of her church, along with a polite note explaining her actions. The fallout was immediate. Rachel's friends and neighbors began to pull away, whispering behind her back. She was removed from the church committee, and her invitations to events mysteriously dried up. I could feel the walls closing in on them, but I wasn't done yet. Anita filed the case with the court, and Rachel and Ben were officially served. I would have given anything to see the look on Rachel's face when she opened that envelope. Instead, I got a furious phone call later that night. "You bastard," she screamed. "How dare you drag this into court? Do you have any idea what you're doing to us?" "I'm holding you accountable," I said calmly. "Something you should have thought about before you forged a will and stole from me." Her voice cracked with desperation. "Liam, please. We're family. This doesn't have to go any further." "Family?" I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. "You stopped being my family the moment you forged Dad's signature. Now, you're just another thief I have to deal with." She hung up, but I could tell the fear was starting to set in. The court date arrived faster than I expected. Rachel and Ben showed up looking disheveled, their usual smug confidence replaced by something far more satisfying: panic. Their lawyer tried to argue that the newer will was valid, but the evidence Anita presented was airtight. The judge didn't hold back. He declared the forged will invalid and ordered the house and remaining assets to be returned to me. Rachel and Ben were also referred to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I thought it was over. I thought I'd won. But life has a funny way of surprising you. A few weeks later, Rachel and Ben put the house on the market. Between their legal fees and Ben's unemployment, they couldn't afford to keep it. I made sure to monitor the listing closely, and when the time was right, I made an offer. It was just high enough to edge out the competition, but low enough to twist the knife. They didn't have a choice. They accepted. On the day they moved out, I stood in the driveway as the moving truck pulled away. Rachel and Ben refused to look at me as they loaded the last of their belongings. "This isn't your house anymore," I said, echoing Rachel's words from months earlier. She froze, her shoulders stiffening, but she didn't turn around. Ben muttered something under his breath, but I didn't catch it. They drove away without another word, leaving me standing there with the keys to the house Dad had built. My house. But even as I walked through the empty halls, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. The house felt different now, stripped of its warmth and memories. It wasn't the home I'd grown up in, it was just a hollow shell of what it used to be. I thought about Rachel and Ben, about the wreckage I'd left in their lives. A part of me wondered if I'd gone too far, if I'd let my anger consume me. But then I remembered the way Rachel had laughed in my face, the way Ben had tossed my childhood memories to the curb like trash. No, I thought. They deserved every bit of it. And as I stood in the doorway, staring out at the quiet street, I realized that sometimes, justice doesn't come from the law. Sometimes, you have to take it into your own hands. I thought it was over. I'd taken back what was mine, destroyed Rachel and Ben's facade, and left them with nothing but the consequences of their greed. The house was in my name, their social circle had abandoned them, and they were facing criminal charges. By all accounts, I had won. But life has a way of showing you that just when you think you're the one pulling all the strings, someone else is playing a game you didn't even know existed. It started with a knock on my door. I'd barely settled back into the house when Anita showed up unexpectedly, her face pale and her usual air of confidence replaced by something I hadn't seen before, unease. "Liam," she said as I opened the door. "We need to talk. Now." I gestured for her to come inside, my stomach tightening. "What's going on?" She stepped into the living room, her eyes scanning the space like she was searching for hidden cameras. Finally, she turned to me and pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag. "I got a call this morning from Rachel's lawyer. They're claiming you set them up." I froze. "What? That's ridiculous. I didn't set anyone up." She handed me the paper. "They're saying you forged the original will. That the copy you found on the hard drive was faked by you to frame Rachel and Ben. And," she hesitated, looking uncomfortable, "they've submitted evidence to back it up." I snatched the paper from her hands and scanned it. It was an affidavit from some handwriting expert, claiming that the signature on the original will didn't match Dad's handwriting. Attached was a sworn statement from Rachel, claiming that she and Dad had spoken about his decision to leave everything to her because, as the married sibling, she had more financial responsibilities. My hands shook as I read it. "This is complete garbage," I said through gritted teeth. "You know I didn't forge anything, Anita." "I believe you," she said quickly. "But it's not about what I believe. If they can convince the court that the original will you provided is fake, this could blow up in our faces." The idea of Rachel turning the tables on me made my blood boil. But what scared me more was how confident she seemed. Where was this boldness coming from? She had to know I had emails, recordings, more than enough to prove she and Ben were the ones who committed fraud. Yet here she was, claiming I was the fraudster. I spent the next few days combing through my evidence, trying to figure out what she could possibly use to discredit me. I reviewed every email I'd taken, every photo, every document. And that's when I noticed something odd. One of the emails between Rachel and her lawyer, the one discussing the forged will, had a timestamp that didn't make sense. It was dated a week before Dad's death, but the phrasing made it seem like he'd already passed. At the time, I'd assumed it was just a typo. But now, with Rachel's accusations hanging over my head, it felt like something more. I forwarded the email to Anita, asking her to take a closer look. The next morning, she called me back, her voice tense. "Liam," she said. "I don't know how to tell you this, but I think Rachel didn't just forge the will. I think she might have," she trailed off, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "Might have what?" I pressed. She took a deep breath. I think she and Ben may have been involved in your father's death. Her words hit me like a freight train. That's impossible, I said, my voice shaking. Dad died of a heart attack. He was old, Anita. He had health problems. I know, she said carefully. But look at the timing. Rachel and Ben forged the will before he died, and they transferred the house into her name less than a week after his funeral. That kind of legal maneuvering doesn't happen overnight. It feels calculated. I sat down, my head spinning. Could Rachel and Ben really have done something that evil? It sounded insane. But then I thought about everything I'd learned about them, their greed, their callousness, their willingness to lie and manipulate. Do you have any proof? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Not yet, Anita admitted. But if you're willing, we can start digging. If there's something to find, we'll find it. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but I agreed to let Anita investigate. She hired a private investigator to look into Dad's final days, combing through medical records, financial transactions, and any communications he might have had before his death. What they uncovered made my blood run cold. 2 days before Dad died, Rachel had taken him to the hospital for what she claimed was a routine checkup. According to the medical records, he'd been given a prescription for a new heart medication, a medication known to cause severe complications if mixed with the blood pressure pills Dad was already taking. Rachel hadn't mentioned any of this to me, and there was no record of Dad ever picking up the prescription himself. But there was a receipt under Rachel's name, dated the same day he supposedly started the medication. The investigator also uncovered something even more damning: security footage from a pharmacy near Rachel's house. It showed her picking up the prescription and then, just hours later, buying a bottle of wine. Wine that, according to the investigator's report, had been served at dinner the night before Dad's death. I confronted Rachel the next day. I waited outside her rundown apartment, the one she and Ben had been forced to move into after losing the house, and intercepted her as she was walking to her car. What the hell is this? I demanded, shoving a folder full of evidence into her hands. She flipped through the pages, her face draining of color as she read. Liam, this doesn't prove anything, she stammered. It proves you gave Dad medication you knew would kill him, I said, my voice cold and even. You wanted the inheritance so badly, you were willing to risk his life for it. That's not true, she cried, tears streaming down her face. It was an accident. I didn't know. Save it, I snapped. I'm taking this to the police. Rachel and Ben were arrested a week later. The charges? Fraud, forgery, and manslaughter. It turned out Ben had been the one to suggest the medication switch, convincing Rachel it would make Dad appear sicker and speed up the inheritance process. They hadn't meant to kill him, or so they claimed. But the evidence was overwhelming. I sat in the courtroom as they were sentenced, my emotions a tangled mess. I'd wanted justice, but I never imagined it would lead here. As they were led away in handcuffs, Rachel turned to look at me one last time. You think you've won, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But you'll never forgive yourself for this. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wouldn't. But as I walked out of the courthouse that day, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of closure. I hadn't just reclaimed my inheritance, I'd uncovered the truth. And in the end, that was worth more than anything they'd taken from me.